this week, I want to go ahead and take a crack at every single Duskmourn deck that came out, and I want to upgrade them and see where we can get. The criteria for this is going to be that the decks must be able to still fit within that $15 budget that I like doing, so I'm not going to suggest upgrades that would break you spending $15 extra on top of what you spend on the deck normally. I do want to note, however, that this is probably one of the sleekest sets of precons we have ever gotten, so they're actually fairly difficult to upgrade, since most of the cards that work in them are doing the jobs they're supposed to do very, very well. That all said, I do think there is some room for improvement in all of these precons. So let's go ahead and talk about the first of them, and this is Jump Scare, the Zamone Mystery Unraveler Commander deck. Before we get into everything, we need to look at the deck and see what the commander is doing and which commander of the two that are available we want to use. The two options we are given are Zamone herself, who has a landfall ability that is incredibly useful, and Kian Corrupted Memory, who has an evens versus odds. Sometimes my cards get flash and sometimes they don't. Voltron draw play style. I don't think we're gonna be using her. So let's go ahead and check out what the deck looks like when we go with Zamone Mystery Unraveler. Since we are sticking with Zamone, let's go over her abilities. She is a Simic and 2 landfall commander who says the first time you have a land touch the board, you manifest Dread, which means you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one in your graveyard, and the other one goes face down as a 2/2 creature. Then, if you have another land touch your board at any point during the turn, then you will flip any face down permanent you have face up. This is an insane commander to me. This is a very insane commander, and my reasoning is very simple. Free cards are nuts, especially in Simic. These are the trust fund colors of Magic the Gathering, so having access to trust fund mana and trust fund draw, just getting supplemented by free cards off the top, is just kinda crazy to me. If we look at how the deck is built out of the box, we've got a lot of big creature payoffs. We've got some board wipes in here, 4 actually, which is a really good amount. 8 cards of draw engine that are dedicated solely to giving you fresh cards, and 10 pieces of face down synergy. These are all really good to see. And as it is a landfall deck, there's lots of ramp in here, but I have some questions as to what options they chose. We'll go over that when we go over the cuts. And for the removal package, they're very scant on removal. I feel like this deck wants to be the threat, but doesn't know how to actually stop a threat. There's a little bit of top deck manipulation, since the deck is relying very heavily on off-the-top win cons, and of course, there is a big win con with Overwhelming Stampede, a card that's sole purpose is to take all of those little 2/2s that you haven't flipped up yet and turn them into lethal boys. But I do have a couple of questions. One, what is Kian doing in here? What is this card supposed to be? What is it supposed to do? As long as her power is even, you can cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. If her power is odd, you can cast creature spells as though they had flash. The other commander doesn't care about casting spells at all, so I just do not understand what this thing is supposed to be doing. I feel like there is a second deck in a second world somewhere where this card has some kind of merit, but all things considered, for this deck, we'll go over this when we get to the cuts. I also have questions about Biomass Mutation. I do not understand what this is doing in here. All creatures you control get base power XX until end of turn, which feels on the surface like a way to supplement the win con that is available with Overwhelming Stampede. But again, this seems kind of superfluous because I don't want to be spending that kind of mana on that effect. 5 mana for Overwhelming Stampede makes sense. If I have one big creature, I make everything a big creature, and then they get trampled. That's it. If I use Biomass Mutation, though, I have to sink an entire turn's worth of mana, potentially preventing myself from holding up the counter spell that is in the deck. I don't understand this one here. There is another area of the deck that that I feel really needs some tender love and care, and that is the land section. While we do have amazing lands like Yavimaya Coast and Vine Glimmer Snarl, we have strange inclusions like Thornwood Falls and Quandrix Campus. So my problem with cards like this are really simple. I do not like tapped lands that do not give us a significant advantage. A significant advantage is 1 mana's worth of an advantage. So, as an example, a card like Opt costs 1 mana, and if I use Opt, I get a scry and a draw. So, if I play something like, say, this Temple of Mystery, that scry is worth half a mana to me. That is not worth the cost of dropping it on the board as a land I don't get to use this turn. There is little difference to me in dropping a land down on a turn and not being able to play it versus just missing the land drop entirely and drawing an actual usable land on a subsequent turn in terms of how the deck feels to play. Now, this deck manages to avoid this problem a little bit because we can just throw the bad lands away as the game goes on. But again, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't think we should be forced to do that. I think it's perfectly reasonable to make sure that all of our lands are very, very live. And there's another area where this deck desperately needs improvement. There are 4 fetching lands in the deck, and these are the fetching lands you expect to see in almost every kind of Precon. Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, Myriad Landscape. I like all of these, but we need much more to make this deck sing. Out of the box, though, I do want to go ahead and note cards like World Spine Worm and Multani are fantastic includes. These give us a very obvious idea of what the deck wants to do when we flip cards up. We want something that is so absolutely massive that it will win the game on its own or has to be dealt with in some other way. We also have lovely pieces of stabilization like Sandworm Convergence and Scoot Swarm, another way to just flat out threaten to win the game. All in all, this deck is like 80% of the way there. So, let's go ahead and see if $15 might be enough to push it over the edge. Now, I know I said this deck is 80% of the way there, and what I mean by that is it's 80% of the way there on concept, but I think we need to go ahead and cut a lot of the deck out. 40% of it completely. It just needs to all go, right? So let's go ahead and start with Kian. Kian just doesn't deserve to be in here. This is a different deck entirely, and the Biomass Mutation doesn't need to be in here as well. This is a budget overwhelming Stampede that doesn't really need to be here in any way, shape, or form. As far as the big creature payoffs the deck originally came with, I'm not a big fan of Scab Ruinator. It's got a cool effect, but at the end of the day, it's just a 5/6 flyer with no real added benefits. If we're going to be getting stuff off the top of our deck for free, we can actually go bigger and better than that. Cackling Counterpart is a fun clone, but it doesn't operate off the top of our deck. I feel like this was included because of the flashback ability, but it's just not that necessary. Hydra Omnivore is a wonderful 8/8, and if it deals damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to every other opponent. But the deck really lacks in ways to make sure that this can make it through. It doesn't have any good way to give this card evasion, nor does it have good ways to give it trample, and I think we'd be better off putting better cards in the deck as a result of that. Shriekwood Devourer is really, really good. When you attack with one or more creatures, untap up to X lands where X is the greatest power among those creatures. I feel like there's some nutty stuff you can do in here, but not really for the direction I want to go in with the deck. This is not a bad card. This is a very, very good card, and if you want to keep this in your version of the deck, I wholly understand. I just have a different direction I want to go, and this does not fit that direction. Same with Giggling Skitterspike. I think there's lots of decks where this card does amazing, and the build that this deck seems to be going for wants to drop this down for free to offset its monstrosity cost, so whenever this attacks or blocks or becomes the target of a spell, it burns all opponents down. This is very obviously trying to be a big mana payoff that is also a win con. I feel like in a counters matters deck, like a modular deck, this card sings way better than anything else because you can put those 5 counters on in a myriad of ways. For this version of the deck, though, I want to stick with stuff that doesn't require us to dig deeper in mana. So let's go ahead and cut that out as well. For the board wipes, we're going to knock out Zamone's Hypothesis and Aether Gale. Aether Gale's wonderful, but returning 6 non-land permanents to their owner's hand, I feel like removing those cards entirely just works better for us, since we are not running a myriad of counter spells to follow this up. As for Zamone's Hypothesis, you may put a 1/1 counter on a creature, then choose odds or even and return every creature of the chosen quality to its owner's hand. It is basically a extinction event style card that really doesn't feel right here. It feels like we don't have enough ways to modulate the power and toughness of our cards, and we don't benefit too much from the cards being in our hand specifically, as we don't have cards like One with the Multiverse or Omniscience to make those cards come down on their own. So this is going ahead and getting the cut. As for the cards from the draw up section, I think Dig Through Time doesn't belong in this deck. We want lots of creature cards. We want them to do well. I feel like this is included because we're going to be filling up our grave for the delve cost, but I really think there's different and better draw we can be using that is more on theme and more consistent. Body of Knowledge also probably needs to be taken out of here. The fact that whenever this is dealt damage, draw that many cards is wonderful, but it is uncontrollable draw that we just do not need for this style of deck. I think there's decks where this is wonderful, like Tamiyo. This one, not as much. Kefnet the Mindful is also an interesting include in the original deck, but I think it needs to go as well. My reasoning for this one is pretty simple. Flying Indestructible Legendary Gods are really cool in the command zone, but that draw ability that it has feels like its only job is to let us reset lands for landfall. But at 4 mana, we can do better and be more efficient. Rashmi Eternity's Crafter feels like a wonderful commander on their own, but whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top of your library. You may cast it without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with lesser mana value than one you have already cast. This feels like a win more card to me. While it is a draw spell off the first spell you cast every turn, and that is a wonderful thing for a Spellslinger style deck, for our style deck, I do not want to be spending that mana more than once a turn anyway. The draw power from this is great, and I do not think this is a bad card by any means. I just feel like for the style we're going for, this doesn't fit it. For the face-down synergies, Growing Dread just isn't doing enough for us, neither is Dreadmist Raptor. Glitch Interpreter is also not doing a whole lot for us either. When one or more colorless creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. This is obviously meant to make sure the manifest creatures deal lots of damage and draws lots of cards, but for 3 mana, as a 2/3 creature that is easy to remove, I feel like I would rather any other Bident of Thassa or Coastal Piracy style card pay 1 more mana for a card that's harder to remove and will benefit us when our face-up creatures deal damage as well as the face-down ones. And even then, I don't think this is necessarily needed as an effect in our deck anyway. Curator Bestie is really cute. Colorless creatures get 2 additional 1/1 counters, and whenever it attacks or enters, manifest Dread. That's a very, very powerful ability, but again, we're going to be going down a direction that doesn't necessitate this particularly, since this doesn't have any type of evasion on it. As for the ramp section, I'm going to be taking Beanstalk Giant out. Again, it's not that this card is bad. Please never think that a card's being removed from Precon because it's bad. I just don't think we need this particular effect in the deck. 3 mana to get a single land out is good, but there are other versions of this effect that work better for us and go a little bit further. Greater Tanuki is being cut for the exact same reason for its channel cost. Civic Signet and Arcane Signet are being cut because, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I feel like if I am building a deck with either of these, I do not need it to be green. Most of my green decks do not include an Arcane Signet if I can help it, because there just isn't much of a reason to keep this when you have access to things like Rampant Growth, something that doesn't die to a artifact style board wipe like a Vandal Blast and still gives you all the land you possibly could want. In that same vein, Overgrown Zealot and the Hierophants here don't really fit the bill for me. They are mana dorks, and they do a great job in mana dork-heavy decks, but I do not like them in this kind of deck. Overgrown Zealot lets us do flip face-down stuff and is very on theme, but we just do not need a mana dork in this slot, especially not a 2-mana mana dork. And the Hierophant seems to be doing a wonderful job on its own, but we have a Shaya in the deck, which is doing a better job of doing doing this effect with added synergies as well. The Ashaya that the deck includes gives us the ability to get landfall every time we manifest a creature, and that's just going way further than what this budget version of Ashaya is doing. Yavimaya Elder seems to only be in here to give us lands in the hand, but Trail of Mystery is already in the deck, doing this job way better. Growth Spiral has honestly been power crept in my mind. I do not hate Growth Spiral in a deck that is dedicated to running lots of this style effect, but in our deck already, Eureka Moment, which is a better version of this card for me, is already in the deck. And there's a upgrade for this that I'll show you in the upgrade section that just does this effect, but a little more consistently for me. Speaking of consistency, Disorienting Choice needs to be cut out because giving our opponents the choice for this card sometimes does not work out well in our favor. Oftentimes we'll play this and everybody will just choose to get rid of the mana rock on their board that we want. And if there is a sufficiently threatening thing on the board, like a Bolas' Citadel, that this isn't able to remove because our opponent chooses to keep it, that's also not very great for us. I would like landfall that we can control entirely, and I would like removal that we can control entirely. And for Shigeki Jukai Visionary, this effect is wonderful but slow. It doesn't synergize very well with our deck at all. Revealing top of our library to put a land from among them on the top is okay, but putting the rest in the graveyard means we're not really being able to manipulate those cards for Zamone, so he feels like a very confusing include for me. And for top deck manipulation, we will be cutting Retreat to Coral Hell. Again, this is a fantastic card, but I think if you're going to put this in a Zamone deck, put it in Zamone and Dina, where it's allowing us to reuse the commander's effect over and over again. Zamone herself doesn't benefit a ton from the tap or untap synergies here. The most you get is the Scry in the deck. And again, I think we're going to find stuff in here that can dig a little deeper and do a little better. Finally, moving on to the dual land section, you might find this kind of weird, but I'm actually cutting out the good dual lands, and I have a very good reason for this, and you'll see as we go to the gameplay test. But Flooded Grove, Yavimaya Coast, Overflowing Basin, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and Hinterland Harbor are all being cut. These are all fantastic lands and should be in almost any Simic deck. However, we are a landfall Simic deck, and I've learned from experience that in those decks, every single land you use needs to either be fetching lands, be a basic land, or be a searchable land. So these are all getting cut. And in any upgrade I ever do, Thornwood Falls, Temple of Mystery, and Quandrix Campus would always be first on the chopping block over anything else. For utility lands, Castle Vantris is a very slow scry we just do not need access to, and Temple of the False God needs to go because it's Temple of the False God. There's a billion videos on the math of Temple of the False God being bad, and we don't plan on spending a lot of mana on our cards to begin with, so I really don't think we need that slot to be here. And for fetching lands, again, another card that I think is fantastic on its own, Ash Barrens has gotta go. This is because this does not benefit our deck in any way. Normally, I think this is great mana fixing, but we want cards like Evolving Wilds that are going to give us 2 sets of land drops all the time. If we're going to be getting basic lands out of the deck, we need it to be for the purpose of triggering our commander. So this is going to have to go. And again, I hope you'll understand why once we get to the next section. All right, I know those cuts were very painful. Again, many of them were just fantastic cards on their own, and it really sucks taking them out of a deck, but just bear with me. I think you'll understand where we're going in exactly 2 cards. So let's start with the big creature payoffs that were in the original deck. Now that we have taken out so many things, what are we going to be adding into the new version of the deck? Well, the first one I think we need to add in is Experiment 12. Remember how I said that I like the idea of being able to put 1/1 counters on stuff that we have, but I just do not think that we have enough of that in the deck. This is the version of that stands alone and does an incredible job on its own that I love. A 4/4 with Trample that says whenever it or another creature is flipped up, we put 1/1 counters on a creature equal to its power. This benefits what the deck is trying to do perfectly. Now, if we flip over that Worldspine Worm, it will come down as a 30/30, and oftentimes we'll be swinging as that. So this is exactly what the deck is looking for. Past that, ask yourself real quick, what are some of the most expensive cards in all of Magic the Gathering, mana cost-wise, that are very powerful when swinging at your opponent? I'll give you a moment to type in the comment section and tell me which ones you think I'm going to be pointing to. And before you do that, maybe also consider subscribing to the channel. That little bit of self-promotion out of the way, I think we need to talk about Eldrazi. I have included a number of Eldrazi in this deck that will benefit us greatly. So, with Zamone being able to play these cards basically for free, any of the Eldrazi that come down and don't have a cast trigger we care about are auto-includes in the deck, and we've got some really cheap ones we have access to. Pathraiser of Ulamog has Annihilator 3 and is very hard to block. Bane of Balaged has a pseudo-Annihilator 2. Ulamog's Crusher has an Annihilator 2. Breaker of Creation has Annihilator 2 and a silly little hexproof ability, and Hand of Emrakul has Annihilator 1, which isn't as good as anything else we could put in, but at this budget we do have to make some consolidations, and Annihilator 1 on top of the other Eldrazi is still a decent consideration. I think each and every one of these cards is going to be doing enough in the deck to justify their position in here. Instead of having an 8/8 or a 6/6 that sometimes gives a little bit of power, each and every one of these is an automatic need to remove threat that our opponents are going to have to deal with the exception of the Hand of Emrakul. This card's doing its best, but it is still very good at what it is doing. Past that, let's move on to the board wipes. I think Thousand Wind is going to be a good replacement board wipe for us. When it is turned face up, return all other tapped creatures to their owner's hand. Since we have the ability to turn it face up with either its morph cost or Zamone's ability at any point, we can use this as another version of the Aetherize effect we took out of the deck. Being able to flip this up off of cracking and evolving wilds on an opponent's turn and making certain that our opponent is not able to hit us with a big army of swinging elves can be the difference between life and death. And the fact that we can do that at instant speed is all the better. As for our face-down synergies, I've added a few cards that I think you're gonna love. First of all, Vannifar Evolved Enigma. This allows us to cloak a card from our hand at the beginning of combat every turn. That lets us put a card face down and give it ward. This is identical to what our own commander is doing, just from the hand instead of the top of the deck. So if you happen to draw a card that would be better suited as a manifested card, this will give you the ability to put it face down, and then Zamone will be able to flip it up at any point. Speaking of manifesting, though, you should probably throw in Valgavoth's Onslaught. This lets you manifest Dread X times, which is the amount of mana that you spend into it cut in half, and then you put X/1/1 counters on each of those creatures. Again, I do not hate the 1/1 counter idea that was in the original deck for some of these cards. I just think cards like this are doing that particular job infinitely better. Being able to manifest Dread a bunch of times and then crack a bunch of fetch lands we've had sitting on the board to flip up the ones that are most threatening is probably one of the best things you can do with this, period. After that, I really like Under the Skin. This gives us a bit of recursion in the deck, returning any permanent from our graveyard to our hand, of which our deck is mostly comprised of permanents, and also that Manifest Dread attached to it is basically free. Then we have Hide in Plain Sight, which lets us look at the top 5 cards of our library and cloak 2 of them, which is absolutely perfect. This is basically getting 2 free Eldrazi on the board instantly, and I adore it. As for the ramp section, I think that we need to go ahead and talk about Planar Genesis. I know that I mentioned Growth Spiral was very, very good, but there was a card that I think just does its job better right now, and for me, that is Planar Genesis. Being able to look at the top 4 cards of your library and put any land among them on the battlefield tapped, and then if you do not choose one, you can just put any card from among them in your hand instead, right? Like, this is letting us dig 4 cards deep, and that is just insane. You can choose to keep the best of the 4 cards, or you can choose to put the land down as ramp. This is just doing Growth Spiral's job, but infinitely better to me. In my opinion, Growth Spiral is the sometimes yes, sometimes no rampant growth, but for us, I'd like this ability infinitely more. I also like Wood Elves in this deck, as the deck did contain a Tangled Islet, so let's go ahead and put in a way to fish that out of the deck. Kodama's Reach, Roiling Regrowth, and Harrow all are auto-includes for me as well, because each of these does the job of pulling multiple lands out of the deck, sometimes putting them all on the board at once, at instant speed, mind you, and sometimes getting them out and letting us sequence them as we want with Kodama's Reach. I think for every bit of ramp in the deck, we need to make sure that the lands are touching the board, and every card that lets us get multiple lands lands on the board is just an automatic improvement over what the deck was already doing. Next, I really wanted to flesh out the removal package the deck came with because it was very, very scant. I like my decks being able to deal with threats, and this is one of the reasons why we made as many cuts as we did. I needed to sculpt and shape this deck into something almost entirely different in terms of what it was going for, while keeping the main deck strategy intact. So let's begin with Stratus Dancer. This has Megamorph, and when you turn it face up, counter any instant or sorcery spell. This is a pseudo-negate style effect that I think is incredibly important, especially when we are dealing with a deck that is very, very weak to fog style effects. Speaking of that, I think adding an extra negate in the deck will not hurt at all, and Chrome Shell Crab, when it turns up, we can exchange control of it with one of creature an opponent controls. This gives us the ability to yank away an opponent's commander and keep it basically forever. Willbender also gets to flip up, and if we flip this spell up, we can change the target of any spell to any single target. This gives our deck very, very important protection for our commander, or protection for one of the big Eldrazi we drop down. This is honestly a fantastic include. Then we have Colony Ambush and Bridgeworks Battle. Both of these serve the purpose of being MDFCs, so they are lands on the back side when we need them to be, and since our deck is built of so many large creatures, having fight spells in the deck is a no-brainer to me. Finally, let's slot in a Collective Resistance, because this card gives us the ability to blow up artifacts, enchantments, or give our commander protection until end of turn, and we can choose all of them at once if we so choose. This is honestly a fantastic ability. For 4 mana, being able to blow up 2 cards and stop our opponent from killing our commander, or paying 2 mana to get rid of 1 problem immediately if we have to be happen to be on that type of curve, is just fantastic in my book, and I think it's an automatic inclusion. Now, for one of the areas that's getting significantly sculpted, let's look at the draw package we're changing the deck into. The deck didn't have as much top deck manipulation as I would have liked, so let's go ahead and add top deck manipulation into our draw package with the combination of Brainstone, Brainstorm, and Brain Surge. Each of these allows us to draw multiple cards and then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library. This means if we happen to have a very powerful card that really needs to be on top to manifest, this allows us to put that where it needs to go. Then Secret Plans is a fantastic card here. Anytime we flip up a permanent, we get to draw a card. That's just free real estate. That's just free card draw. Soul of the Harvest gives us card draw anytime a non-token creature touches the board, with the benefit of being a 6/6 trampler as well. And finally, Return of the Wild Speaker, Garrett Primal Hunter, and Rishkar's Expertise are all giving us draw based on the greatest power of a creature we control. We have Eldrazi in the deck, so the greatest power of cards in our deck is honestly a pretty high ceiling to hit. Rishkar's also gives us the ability to spawn out another card from our hand without paying its mana cost, which is just amazing. I think this is probably an auto-include in most green decks, if you can help it. But the area that I think we're going to see even more improvement is the land base. And I cannot stress this enough, going for multiple fetching lands in this deck will improve it significantly. Promising Vein, Shire Terrace, Bant Panorama, Esper Panorama, Grixis Panorama, Naya Panorama, Jund Panorama. I don't care that some of these can't grab every land type in our deck. They only have to grab one. The reason the panoramas are so good is they operate as mana whenever we need them to operate as mana, and we can crack them at any point if we need to manifest multiple times. If you have just a couple of colored lands, and then you've got cards like Jund Panorama and Naya Panorama en masse on the board, the ability to just go, oh, I haven't manifested anything I really need. I'm going to go ahead and manifest on each of my opponent's turns to build up a board state, and then on my turn, cast a ramp spell and play a land to flip whichever of these cards that you want. It's just crazy. I'll show you when we get to the gameplay section. These cards do a lot of work. As far as fetching lands go, I also think you need to add Escape Tunnel and Broker's Hideout to the deck. Both of these are able to automatically come down and fetch, meaning we get our commander's ability instantly. Both of them, if we have these in our hand. If you happen to have the money for an Urza's Cave, I couldn't include it in this deck list, but an Urza's Cave gives you a really, really good ability as well. Being able to grab any land from your deck sometimes means that you can crack the Urza's Cave, get Broker's Hideout. Broker's Hideout automatically sacks itself, getting another land out, giving you the ability to trigger your commander 3 times in one quick succession off of a single land. That's honestly amazing, and I wish I could have included it in this deck. Then Blighted Woodland is giving us access to 2 basic lands out of the deck for the cost of 5 mana. With that said, that does it for all the upgrades that are in the deck, and the consistent theme for each of these has been taking what the deck was already doing and just giving it a little more juice, a little more consistency. But I know that seeing is believing, and if I'm making 40 cuts out of an already fantastic Precon, well, let's go ahead and get to the gameplay section and show you exactly what the deck is trying to do. Let's go ahead and take a look at what would be a capable hand here. We have access to 2 bits of mana, 1 bit of top deck manipulation and draw. We have 2 forms of ramp and top deck manipulation with the Sakura Tribe Elder and Augur of Autumn, and we have some automatic face down, face up payoffs that can double as draw engines for us. This is honestly a fantastic hand, and all we need to do is draw a single land, and the hand is perfect. And we have the ability to dig at least 5 cards deep based on what's in the hand already. So the likelihood that we'll hit that is very high. We'll go ahead and draw our card for turn and play our Promising Vein. We have no need to crack this anytime soon, so we're going to keep this just as colorless mana for the foreseeable future. The next turn comes up, and we can go ahead and drop a forest on the board, tapping 2 and getting Sakura Tribe Elder out. Sacking the Sakura Tribe Elder gives us a forest out of the deck, and now we have the ability to play Augur of Autumn on a following turn if we need to, now that we have access to the extra green mana. We draw a card for turn 3, and we can drop an island on the board. With this, we can go ahead and play our commander on turn 3. It is unlikely anybody has removal at this stage of the game, and because we are a face-down deck, the threat of what our deck is doing is very, very unknown. Now that we've drawn a card, we have a couple of options here. We can either use the Augur of Autumn and see if we can get a land off the top of our deck, or we can use the Brain Surge. And I think the Brain Surge is going to be the automatic choice for me. Being able to dig 4 cards into the deck gives us a high likelihood of getting a land. We're going to keep the Promising Vein untapped so I can show you why we kept that in the deck. Brain Surge has given us a lovely set of 4 cards with a Hand of Emrakul and a Sandworm Convergence available to us. If we look at our hand, we need to see which cards we do not want to keep. And honestly, out of these, I think that the ones that immediately stick out to me are the Eureka Moment, that can go back on top of the deck, and the Sandworm Convergence. The Sandworm Convergence has a snowball effect that I want to take advantage of, and we are going to go ahead and try to use that here in a bit. Since we did draw our Bant Panorama, let's go ahead and play the Bant Panorama, allowing us to manifest Dread. Looking at these 2, we throw the Eureka Moment away, and we go ahead and put the Sandworm Convergence on the board. Now that we've dropped down the Panorama, let's go ahead and tap the Promising Vein and the Panorama, and go into our deck to get ourselves a new land. When the island comes down, that gives us our second landfall ability, and now we can go ahead and turn over that Sandworm Convergence on turn 4. Now, at the beginning of every end step, we will create a lovely 5/5 token that's going to slowly snowball the game for us. And on turn 4, like, being able to get this card out on turn 4, I don't know if I can stress how hard it is for our opponents to win in this state. If on turn 4 we have the ability to block all flyers from hitting us, and we spawn a 5/5 every turn that we can use to block anything on the ground, now there are far fewer strategies that can handle us at this stage. The next turn comes up, and we've drawn an Evolving Wilds. So we need to ask ourselves what we need more than anything right now. And I do not think we need to worry about the Evolving Wilds just yet. I think it's probably a safe idea to get that Augur of Autumn out just so we can look at the top of our deck and see what we've got. We see that we have a Reliquary Tower, so let's go ahead and play that for the free Manifest Dread. We have Drownyard Temple and Island here, and we don't really need the Drownyard Temple, so we're going to go ahead and do some Hyper Ramp. We throw the Drownyard Temple away, and this gives us the island turned over. We use Augur of Autumn to look at the top of our deck, and we see that we have Valgavath's Onslaught. We do not need to get another trigger of our commander just yet, not the first trigger, so we're gonna go ahead and pay 3 and let the Drownyard Temple come out of the graveyard. This comes into play tapped, and it allows us to turn over that island. We've just done a significant amount of ramp just by having the Augur of Autumn let us look at the top of our library and toss a land down. This means on subsequent turns, we will be able to cast plenty of spells if we need to. For now, we're going to go ahead and end the turn, spawning a new Worm token. It is turn 6, and we have drawn that Valgavath's Onslaught, and I think it's time to go ahead and cash it in. We can spend a lot of mana into it and see what we can grab off the top, but first let's go ahead and do a check with the Augur of Autumn and see that we have a collective resistance. We don't necessarily need that right now, so let's go ahead and use that Valgavath's Onslaught. We are spending 7 mana on the Onslaught so we can manifest Dread 3 times. So let's go ahead and see what our first one is. Our first one is Collective Resistance and a Forest, so we're going to go ahead and put that Forest down. The second Manifest Dread is Pathraiser of Ulamog and a Forest, so we're going to throw the Forest away and put the Pathraiser of Ulamog down. The next one is going to be Forest and Counterspell, so we go ahead and throw away the Counterspell and put that Forest down. Now we can go ahead and play Evolving Wilds. This will allow us to look at the top of our library again and manifest Dread once more. We're going to put the Scroll of Fate down instead of the Wood Elves because the Wood Elves enter the battlefield effect will not trigger from a manifest Dread. Now, when we tap Evolving Wilds, we'll be able to go into the library, grab another island, and put that on the board. This allows us to get an instant trigger of our commander's ability. We are going to choose to turn over that Forest so that we have access to the mana right now, and by tapping 2, we will go ahead and sacrifice the Promising Vein so that we can go into our library and grab another basic land of any type. Shuffling our library, we get another trigger of our commander, and I think at this point we need to go ahead and turn over that Scroll of Fate we put down. Now, we can go ahead and swing with our Worm tokens to threaten a player, and when we end our turn, as the turn moves around, we're going to go ahead and tap the Scroll of Fate to put the Hand of Emrakul face down on the board. This going down is going to mean that we have 2 Eldrazi ready to swing on a subsequent turn. It's turn 7, and we've stacked so much mana. Let's go ahead and look at the top of our library and see what we have here. It's a Myriad Landscape. I want to use this, but the problem is that we don't want it to come into play tapped. So we're actually going to manipulate that to get those abilities from the Myriad Landscape. So let's go ahead and tap the Drownyard Temple and a little bit of extra mana and get that They Came from the Pipes on the board. This will allow us to manifest Dread twice. We see we have a Myriad Landscape and an island. We throw the island away and turn over the Myriad Landscape. The second Manifest Dread gives us Ulamog Crusher and Secret Plans. We're going to go ahead and throw away the Secret Plans and turn over the Ulamog's Crusher. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. We need to make sure that we can get this Myriad Landscape on the board. So, let's go ahead and get it flipped over. We get 2 draws off of They Came from the Pipes, and now looking at our board and our hand, we have a small problem. We have lots of mana to play spells, but we don't have the ability to flip something over immediately as we've gone ahead and used all of our Manifest Dread capital. So let's go ahead and look at the top of our library and see that it's a Mosswort Bridge. We're going to go ahead and play that so that we get a few triggers and try to dig for a ramp spell. Mosswort Bridge says that we have a Trail of Mystery, a Garruk Primal Hunter, Willbender, and an Explosive Vegetation. I think the correct thing to put down is going to be the Explosive Vegetation, since this card will give us access to more triggers of our commander on a following turn. Let's go ahead and throw the rest of these to the bottom of the deck, and then Manifest Dread for our commander. The Manifest Dread for our commander gives us access to the World Spine Worm. That's the automatic choice, and we get to throw this forest away. Now we have this army of colorless 2/2s that include lots of Eldrazi and a Myriad Landscape we can abuse in a subsequent turn. If we are not board wiped, then we are in a beautiful, beautiful position, and we can actually make sure that that board wipe doesn't happen to us. We can do this simply by morphing our Stratus Dancer face down. Now, normally, I would wait to use something like Scroll of Fate for this, but for our purposes, morphing it down gives us just enough mana to flip it up with its Megamorph ability if something happens to our board state. It's turn 7, so let's assume somebody did cast a board wipe and we flipped up the Stratus Dancer to block it. Now, looking at our hand, we need something interesting. We need to see if we need to get rid of any other threats on the board. So for that, we're going to go ahead and Scroll of Fate that Chrome Shell Crab down, turning it over. Now, if we flip this up on a subsequent turn, we will be able to get rid of another threat on the board if need be. The Stratus Dancer has done its job, so it sits here with a couple of counters. And we move to turn 8, which is typically when I like to end these things. Turn 8 gives us the Thunderfoot Baloth, so we're gonna go ahead and do a fairly complex turn, only that there's a lot of moves, but it's pretty simple, all things considered. First, we're going to tap that Mosswort Bridge and get that Explosive Vegetation online. That puts 2 forests on the battlefield tapped immediately. This gives us a Manifest Dread from our commander. We're going to go ahead and turn over the Garrick, throwing away the Colony Ambush, and it gives us a second trigger of our commander automatically. Looking at our board state, the most important card for us to manifest up is going to be this Myriad Landscape. So let's turn it over untapped. Now we're going to tap the Myriad Landscape and 2 other bits of mana to trigger our commander twice more by getting 2 more lands out of our library. That allows us to flip up the Worldspine Worm and the Pathrazor of Ulamog. For our land for turn, we can drop a forest down, and that lets us flip over another card. I think for our purposes, let's go ahead and flip up that Ulamog's Crusher. Now that we have this amazing board state of powerful cards, let's go ahead and give it the coup de grace and tap 6 mana to drop that Thunderfoot Baloth. This will add 2/2 to our entire board and grant trample to all of it, meaning that the worm tokens we've spawned over each and every turn are now 7/7 tramplers. Pathrazor of Ulamog is an 11/11 trampler with Annihilator 3. Ulamog's Crusher is a 10/10 trampler with Annihilator 2. If we have been chipping away at people's life with the worms we've been spawning every turn, we have the ability now to just turn our card sideways and eliminate at least 2 players from the game. This isn't even counting the fact that we got a free draw off of They Came From the Pipes. So yeah, all things considered, this is a very powerful board state that even had the ability to protect itself and remove a threat if we needed to flip up the Chrome Shell Crab. And in the event that we needed to flip up another card, we could flip up the Garrick Primal Hunter at any point if we get another land and draw 17 cards out of our deck instantaneously to grab any win con we possibly could wish for. Like, I don't know how to explain to you how insane this deck feels to play. It is Simic good stuff without having to actually spend mana on Simic good stuff. And the fact that Zamone operates both as a ramping commander, not just that she has landfall, but she can manifest lands up that allow us to do things like circumvent the downsides of cards like Myriad Landscape, is just insane to me. I think that this is probably one of my favorite decks Wizards has ever given us, just because of the ways in which we can abuse this commander for good. That said, I do want to know what you all think. Did you enjoy the gameplay section at the end of the video? Do you agree with the cuts that I made in the deck? Do you agree with the additions that have been thrown in? Are there any cards that you would like to throw into the deck that you didn't agree with when I was running them personally? I want to see what you all think. There's lots of things that I really enjoy about deck building that I know that people don't really agree with, but I do want to know where y'all are coming from. So let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope you found this video fun and informative and all kinds of just amazing. At least I'm hoping so. I hope I did a good job on this one. I did not do very well with my last set of deck upgrades, so here's hoping that these go a little bit better. That said, let me know what you think down there, and as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Briskrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying that, you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full-time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full-time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one.